It started with a letter. A crisp, white envelope slipped beneath our front door, stamped with the bold letters, HOA notice. I remember the way my wife picked it up, frowning, as if sensing something more than paper weighed inside. But then came the second letter. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, in sharp, angular strokes. Your hedge is 1 inch too tall, it read. Correct it within 48 hours, or we will. I laughed when I first saw it, but my wife didn't. She stared at the page, pale, as if she knew better than I did that this wasn't just a warning. That night, I trimmed the hedge myself, making sure it was perfect. The following morning, when I stepped outside, I froze. The hedge had already been cut. Not cleanly, not evenly, but hacked at with something dull, as if someone had worked under cover of darkness. And there was another note. Pinned to the hedge with a rusted nail. This one read, "Compliance is safety. Non-compliance is danger." That was when I began to notice the neighborhood itself. Every house had the same blinds, drawn at the same height. The same wreaths on every door. The same porch lights, glowing at the same dim setting. It wasn't uniformity by chance. It was deliberate. And for the first time since moving in, I realized how silent everything truly was. No children playing, no music, no barking dogs. Only the occasional hum of a lawnmower, precise and scheduled. That evening, I saw them. 3 men in identical gray suits, walking down the street in perfect unison. They stopped in front of the Johnsons' house, whispered something to each other, then knocked on the door. The Johnsons didn't answer. So the men entered anyway. And though I couldn't see what happened inside, I remember hearing a muffled cry, cut short, followed by the sharp slam of a door. When the men left, the Johnsons' porch light was on. Just like all the others. The next morning, I asked my wife if she'd heard the noise from the Johnsons' house. She shook her head. "Don't ask questions," she whispered. "We just follow the rules." It wasn't like her to sound afraid. That day, another envelope arrived. This time, it wasn't slipped under the door, it was taped to our window. Curtains must be white. Replace immediately. I stared at our soft, blue curtains, ones my wife had chosen on our first night here. I hated the thought of taking them down. But by nightfall, I did. I replaced them with plain, sterile white. And when I stepped back, I saw every house on the street glowing the same lifeless shade. Ours had blended in, erased of personality. Around midnight, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside. Careful. Slow. Deliberate. I pulled back the new white curtain just enough to see. There they were again, the 3 men in gray suits, staring up at my house. One of them raised a clipboard, scribbled something down, and nodded. Then, as if sensing my gaze, all 3 looked up at me in unison. I let go of the curtain instantly, my heart pounding. The following day, the Johnsons' house looked different. Their car was gone. Their blinds were drawn tighter. And their children were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the family had been erased overnight. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Langley, if she'd seen them. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The Johnsons moved," she said quickly. "That's all. They moved." Her voice trembled as she shut the door before I could ask more. That evening, I received another notice. This one was heavier, printed on thick card stock. It said only one thing. HOA meeting. Attendance mandatory. 9 p.m. Community hall. The hall was filled with neighbors, but not with chatter or smiles. Everyone sat stiffly in perfect rows, eyes forward, as if rehearsed. At the front of the room stood a man I had never seen before, tall, sharp features, his suit darker than the others. He didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "Compliance is safety. Safety is peace. You will all obey." The room echoed with a single, unified reply. Yes. But my lips never moved. And I think, he noticed. That night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's piercing gaze. It felt like he had stared straight into my thoughts, peeling them open like pages of a book. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a sound again, this time from my own yard. I crept toward the window, careful not to make a noise. There, under the pale streetlight, stood one of the men in gray. He was measuring my grass with a ruler. I opened the door. "What are you doing?" I hissed. The man didn't flinch, didn't even look at me. He scribbled on his clipboard, then walked away into the shadows without a single word. The next morning, another envelope waited. Grass exceeds HOA standard height. Immediate correction required. But here's the thing, my lawn was freshly cut just 2 days earlier. It was perfect. By then, my wife was trembling at every knock, every shadow that passed our window. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered. "Sell the house, just get out." But the strange thing was, when I checked online, our listing didn't exist anymore. I called our realtor. She swore she had never handled our sale, had no record of it. It was like we had never moved here at all. Our names, our paperwork, gone. That evening, I confronted Mrs. Langley again. "Please," I begged. "What's happening here? Where are the Johnsons?" Her lips quivered. She leaned in close, whispering one word before slamming the door. "Chosen." At exactly 9 o'clock that night, a knock echoed through the house. 3 slow, heavy thuds. When I opened the door, the men in gray suits were waiting. This time, they spoke. "You've been selected." I froze, gripping the doorframe. "For what?" I demanded, my voice shaking. They didn't answer. Instead, they handed me a black envelope sealed with wax. The symbol pressed into it looked like a house, but twisted, wrong. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Final compliance review. Tomorrow. Midnight." And beneath that, in small, neat handwriting, "Failure means removal." The next day was the longest of my life. Every tick of the clock echoed through the house, heavy and suffocating. My wife begged me not to open the envelope again, not to go that night. But deep down, I knew there was no choice. At exactly midnight, I stepped outside. The entire neighborhood was awake, porch lights glowing, curtains pulled back. Every neighbor was watching. Silent. Waiting. It felt less like a community, and more like an audience. The men in gray arrived, moving in perfect unison. They guided me toward the cul-de-sac at the center of the neighborhood. There, I saw it for the first time, a massive circle carved into the pavement, glowing faintly under the street lamps. It wasn't paint. The lines of the circle shimmered like molten metal, etched deep into the ground. Inside the circle stood Mrs. Langley, clutching a leather-bound book that looked older than the neighborhood itself. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Compliance is not just order. Compliance is survival." Her eyes locked on me. "Tonight, the house will decide if you belong." The men pushed me forward until I stood inside the glowing circle. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I swear, I felt the pavement breathe. The air grew cold, heavy, and every porch light flickered at once. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. But when I tried to move, my feet wouldn't obey. It was as if invisible hands gripped my ankles, rooting me in place. The neighbors began to chant, low, steady, and in a language I didn't recognize. Mrs. Langley flipped open her book. The words she read didn't sound human. Each syllable scraped at my skull, making my vision blur. The glowing circle pulsed brighter with every word. And then, I saw them. Faces pressed against the dark windows of the empty houses. Not the Johnsons. Not anyone I recognized. Pale, hollow-eyed figures staring, waiting, like prisoners behind glass. One of the figures lifted its hand, pressing it flat against the window. Its lips moved silently, shaping a single word I could read even from across the street. Run. The moment I saw that figure mouth the word run, my body jolted with panic. But the circle beneath my feet pulsed, holding me still. Mrs. Langley's voice grew louder, sharper, as if feeding on my fear. The neighbors chanted faster. Their eyes no longer looked human, wide, glassy, fixed on me like predators cornering prey. I screamed at them to stop, to let me out. Not one of them blinked. Then the pavement cracked. A jagged line split across the glowing circle. From the crack came a sound I'll never forget, like thousands of nails dragging across metal. Something beneath the neighborhood was waking up. Mrs. Langley snapped the book shut. The house has chosen, she declared. The men in gray stepped closer, their hands reaching for me. Their grip felt like ice, yet burned my skin. I thrashed, fighting them with everything I had. But there were too many. Each one moved with unnatural strength, dragging me toward the center of the circle as the crack widened. A foul stench seeped from below, rot, ash, and earth. The hollow-eyed figures pressed harder against their windows. They weren't watching, they were pleading. Their mouths formed silent cries, their fists pounding the glass, desperate for me to hear. And for the first time, I understood. They weren't ghosts. They weren't illusions. They were the ones who came before me. Every homeowner who had vanished during the final compliance review. The crack beneath me roared open, a pit of swirling blackness yawning at my feet. The men in gray forced me closer to the edge. I clawed at the ground, but the pavement itself seemed alive, pushing me forward. I locked eyes with one of the figures in the window. It looked just like me, same hair, same eyes, even the same scar on my jawline. It shook its head violently, mouthing the same word again. Run. The neighbors' chant reached a deafening climax. Mrs. Langley raised her hands high, her voice booming. The house claims what belongs to it. And with that, the men shoved me toward the pit. I plunged forward, straight into the pit. But instead of falling, I was suspended. The darkness wrapped around me, thick and suffocating, like tar made of shadows. Voices whispered all around. Not in words, but in fragments, screams, sobs, broken prayers. Every sound felt like it was clawing at my mind. It wasn't a place. It was a prison. Images flickered before me. Houses collapsing. Streets swallowing families whole. Children's faces pressed against fogged glass, begging to be freed. All of it looping, endlessly. I realized the HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. It was feeding it. Every missing resident, every vanishing, wasn't an accident. It was an offering. And now, it wanted me. The shadows gripped tighter, searing my skin with invisible heat. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was about to collapse inward. But then, something changed. The figure that looked like me stepped into the pit. It reached out, its hand glowing faintly against the dark. And without speaking, it pressed its palm to mine. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The shadows recoiled, hissing like they'd been burned. A blinding surge of light shot through me, pulling me free from their grasp. The pit began to tremble. The men in gray staggered back, shielding their eyes. The neighbors' chant faltered, some of them collapsing. Even Mrs. Langley looked shaken, her voice cracking for the first time. "No, not him, he's not yours to take." I was hurled upward, out of the pit, crashing onto the pavement. The circle beneath me shattered completely, the glow fading. I lay gasping, covered in sweat and ash, but alive. The pit slammed shut with a deafening crack. I looked up, and every hollow-eyed figure in the windows was gone. The street was silent. The neighbors stared at me in stunned horror. And Mrs. Langley whispered, almost to herself. "This has never happened before." The neighbors didn't move. Dozens of them, frozen, their hollow eyes trembling with confusion. It was like I had broken some unspoken law of their world. Then, one by one, they began to back away. Not in fear, but in disgust. Like I had become something unnatural, something they couldn't bear to look at. Mrs. Langley stepped forward, her mask of calm finally cracked. Her hands shook as she pointed at me. "You weren't chosen. You weren't supposed to resist." The men in gray gathered at her side, whispering urgently. Their words were frantic, not the rehearsed calm I'd heard before. For the first time, they sounded afraid. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling. Every muscle screamed in pain, but I stood anyway. "Tell me what this is," I demanded, my voice hoarse. "What are you feeding that thing?" Mrs. Langley's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand. This neighborhood exists because of it. It gives us safety, wealth, order. But it requires balance. A sacrifice." Her voice softened into something almost pleading. "You should be honored. It chose you. It always chooses the ones who don't belong." I shook my head, fury rising through the fear. "You're not protecting anyone. You're slaughtering them." The crowd flinched, but no one stepped forward to defend her. The figure that looked like me, still standing beside the pit, turned slowly toward Mrs. Langley. Its eyes glowed faintly, not hollow, but alive. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't my enemy. It was something else entirely. Mrs. Langley must have sensed it too. She stepped back, her voice breaking with a note of fear. "No, this isn't right. This isn't how it works." But the ground beneath us rumbled again, as if the pit disagreed. The ground split wider, cracks racing through the perfect brick path. Hedges toppled, streetlights flickered. The order of this perfect neighborhood was unraveling before my eyes. The neighbors clutched their heads, groaning in unison. It was as if their connection to the pit was breaking. Some of them screamed, not in anger, but in pain. The figure, my double, stepped toward me slowly. Its every movement mirrored mine, but its eyes, they burned with defiance. For the first time, I understood. It wasn't a copy. It was the part of me that refused to submit. Mrs. Langley shrieked, her composure gone. "Stop it. Restrain him before it's too late." The gray-suited men lunged forward, but something invisible shoved them back, hard. They hit the pavement with sickening thuds. The neighbors began to scatter, stumbling blindly, their hollow eyes darting as though searching for direction. Without the ritual, they seemed lost. Like puppets cut from their strings. The double stood at the edge of the pit. Its voice finally broke the silence, low, distorted, yet undeniably mine. "You don't belong to them. You never did." Mrs. Langley's face turned pale. "No, if you merge with him, it'll destroy everything we've built." Her words cracked into desperation, no longer the voice of power but of someone cornered. The double reached out its hand toward me. Every instinct told me to run, but something deeper told me to trust it. The ground roared louder, the pit opening wider as though demanding my choice. I stepped forward. My hand trembled as it touched the doubles. A shock ran through me, like fire and ice colliding. In that moment, I felt every scream, every sacrifice, every life stolen by this place. And then, silence. The pit stopped rumbling. The neighbors froze in place. Only Mrs. Langley's scream echoed in the night, because she realized the power had shifted. And it no longer belonged to her. The instant our hands locked, the world fractured. I saw flashes, myself mowing lawns, painting fences, attending meetings, lives I had never lived, forced into me. They weren't mine. They were stolen memories. The double's voice echoed inside my skull. They wanted you to believe this was home. But it was always a prison. The words weren't spoken, they were felt, seared into my bones. Mrs. Langley stumbled backward, her polished mask gone. Her hands shook as she shouted. "Stop! You'll tear the balance apart." But her voice was hollow now, powerless. The neighbors dropped to their knees, clutching their chests. One by one, they began to murmur, like children waking from a nightmare. Confused. Afraid. Human again. I felt strength surging through me, not just mine but theirs. Every soul stolen by the HOA, every life bound by the pit. They were flowing into me, through me. Mrs. Langley shrieked, her voice cracking. "You don't know what you're doing. Without us, this neighborhood will collapse." Her eyes darted wildly, searching for order, for obedience. But none came. The ground shook again, but this time it wasn't destruction. It was release. The perfect hedges withered, fences splintered, the flawless pavement cracked into dust. The illusion of control was unraveling. I turned to Mrs. Langley. Her once flawless face looked old, brittle, desperate. "You built this prison," I said, my voice carrying like thunder, "but you can't keep us here anymore." She staggered, clutching her chest. "No, no, I gave you perfection. I gave you order." Her body flickered, like she was less human than she had ever let on. The double and I stepped forward together. "And as one," we said. "You gave us chains." The air ripped open, a force pulling at her, dragging her toward the pit. Her scream split the night as she was swallowed whole. Silence followed. The pit sealed shut with a thunderous crack, leaving only scorched earth behind. The streetlights flickered, then went dark, plunging the neighborhood into moonlight. The neighbors staggered to their feet, their eyes wide, no longer glassy. Some wept. Some just stared at their trembling hands, as though they were seeing themselves for the first time. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, the weight of countless lives pressing down. The double crouched beside me, but his form was already fading, unraveling into smoke. "You can live free now," he whispered. I reached for him, but my hand passed through nothing. And then, he was gone. A part of me felt ripped away, but another part felt whole, stronger. Mrs. Langley's voice lingered faintly in the night air, a hiss carried on the wind. "You'll regret this." And then it, too, faded. The houses around us began to shift, shedding their perfect paint and symmetrical lines. Grass grew wild. Fences sagged. Windows cracked. But it didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt real. The people gathered together in the cul-de-sac, unsure, frightened, but alive. One of them asked in a trembling voice. "What happens now?" I looked at the ruined street, the broken fences, the endless night. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it will be ours. Not theirs." A murmur spread through the crowd, hesitant, fragile hope. For the first time, they weren't bound. For the first time, they were neighbors, not prisoners. But as I turned, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the street, beyond the ruined homes, a single house still stood untouched. Its lights were on. And someone was watching from the window. The crowd didn't notice the house. They were too busy clinging to each other, crying, breathing for the first time. But I couldn't look away from that window. The silhouette hadn't moved. Slowly, I walked toward it. Every step felt like wading through water, heavy, reluctant. The others called after me, but their voices were muffled, distant. The closer I got, the more wrong the house felt. It was too clean. Too sharp. Like it hadn't been touched by the unraveling of the neighborhood at all. The curtains shifted. A pale hand rested against the glass, fingers long and rigid. My stomach twisted. Because I recognized the ring glinting on that finger. It was my wife's ring. The same one I'd buried with her after the accident. The same one that should have been 6 feet under. I froze at the gate. The front door creaked open slowly, almost invitingly. The hall light spilled across the lawn like a golden path. A voice drifted out, soft, warm, familiar. "My love, why don't you come inside? You've been away so long." It was her voice. Perfectly her voice. Tears stung my eyes. Every instinct screamed to run, but my heart wanted to believe. I stepped 1 foot onto the path. The crowd behind me went silent, as though the whole street was holding its breath. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching. No one dared follow. I reached the threshold. And there she was. My wife, smiling, alive, whole. But her eyes were the same hollow black as Mrs. Langley's. Her smile widened. It was too wide, pulling at her cheeks until the skin cracked faintly at the corners. But my heart still screamed, "It's her." She reached out, fingers trembling as though desperate to touch me. "My love, stay here. Forever. You'll never hurt again." Behind her, the house seemed deeper than it should be, like a void stretching on forever. My knees buckled. Memories of her laughter, her warmth, her absence, flooded me. For one insane second, I almost stepped inside. Then I saw it. On the mantel behind her, an endless row of rings. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one still dripping faintly with blood. Her voice sharpened. The warmth vanished. "Come inside." It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a command. The air thickened, dragging at my limbs. The doorframe pulsed like a heartbeat. I dug my nails into my palms and forced myself back 1 step, then another. Her smile collapsed into a snarl. The hand she'd held out to me snapped backward, twisting at an unnatural angle. Her voice split into 100 overlapping whispers, "Don't leave me again." The house shuddered. The windows rattled. Every shadow in the room leaned forward, reaching for me. And then the door slammed shut. The spell broke. The lawn was empty again. No wife. No whispers. Just another silent house on a ruined street. I staggered back to the crowd. Their eyes held the same question mine did: what now? The neighborhood was free. But the house wasn't gone. And I knew, one day, it would open its door again.